Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of season 2 of the Dark Money Files, in which we shine a light into a murky world. I'm Ray Blake, and with me is my co-host, friend and business partner, Graham Barrow. Hello, Graham.
Hi, Ray.
I'm looking forward to this episode, Graham.
Oh, why is that, Ray?
Firstly, because it's a proper deep dive into empirical data.
Ah, you like data, don't you, Ray?
Anything you can encode into an Excel spreadsheet is okay with me.
And I should mention, for the benefit of any of our listeners who don't already know this, that Ray isn't just a master with Excel. And I have honestly lost count of the projects I've worked on with you where you'll be asked often repeatedly for what's become known as a Ray button, which once clicked will work all sorts of magic, normally in VBA, which for those of you who don't know is the Visual Basic for applications, which is the stuff that runs behind all those nice little icons you click on. And that Ray button will produce exactly the answer required.
Well, you're very kind, Graham. I've always said that if I was only allowed one computer application that I had to use for everything, it would be Excel.
Yes, and as we mentioned in our last episode on Ali Moulay, those skills are still being put to extremely good use.
Indeed.
Now, Ray, you just said firstly in respect to the use of empirical data, so that suggests that there's at least a secondly as well.
There is another reason I've been looking forward to this one, and it's that I'm a sucker for nostalgia, and thinking about Companies House takes me back to an earlier time.
Ooh, how so?
Well, Graham, in the summer of 1983, I'd just finished my O-level exams and was looking forward to my 16th birthday. I was also keen to spend the very long summer holiday earning some money.
Nothing wrong with that. So what did that lead to?
Well, I got a job. I spent the summer working for a company search and formation agency in central London. I was based just a couple of 100 metres from the Old Street City Road roundabout.
Oh, I know it. Yeah, that's just a stop or two up the Northern Line from the very heart of the City of London, isn't it?
That's right, Graham. And the location of that business was no coincidence, because from my office you could throw a stone and have a good chance of hitting Companies House, which in those days was at the roundabout end of City Road.
Ah, and did you visit Companies House?
I did, Graham, twice a day, sometimes more. It was my job to collect all the search requests that had come in, fill in request forms and drop them at the counter at Companies House, where later in the day I would return and get handed copies of the company filings, which I'd then take back to my employer and distribute.
So this is 1983, so were they what, paper documents?
No, Graham, Microfiche.
Well, that's a term I think you might have to explain for our younger listeners, Ray.
Of course. Microfiche was quite old tech, even in the 80s, but it's how Companies House archived the reams and reams of company documents that they had to look after. A given company's records, its memorandum and articles of association, various other filings and regular returns, would all have been photographed, miniaturised and printed in negative onto little sheets of blue-tinted acetate the size of index cards. Many A4 pages to a single card-sized sheet. You'd place one of these cards into a special machine called a microfiche reader, which would shine a light through the acetate and project its image, massively enlarged, onto a thin plastic screen. You'd move the acetate around by hand to navigate through and between different documents shown on the one acetate.
High tech.
Yeah.
It sounds like you were an early forerunner of the Companies House web service, Ray.
That's exactly what I was, Graham. So imagine my surprise that over 35 years later I'm back where I started my career, except now my job has been taken by some HTML code and an online database.
Well, I'm sure you did it better, Ray.
I can assure you, Graham, I didn't.
Fair enough.
Well, yes, the other reason I'm looking forward to this episode is that I think lots of our listeners will find it a really useful guide and training tool for how entities are used in laundromats to disguise ownership, but at the same time help them unearth the clues that will signal the possibilities of criminal activity.
Yeah, Right, I kind of thinking that I don't actually know anyone else with whom I could sit for 20 minutes or so and chat about the finer points of company registration data recorded on the Companies House website and have fun doing so.
Well, I'm not sure that says anything positive about either of us, Graham. But
well, no.
but we'd better get started, I suppose. As I understand it, we're going to look in detail at 3 different entity types: limited companies, limited liability partnerships, and Scottish limited partnerships.
Yes, and what we're going to do is use some specific examples that have been drawn from Companies House to do so. But as usual, can I just add, importantly, the normal caveat that we're not in any way alleging that any of these companies we're going to talk about today or in other episodes are in any way involved in criminal activity.
Correct, and that's important. We're just using them as good examples of the type of behaviour that other, more criminally minded operations can utilise as part of their endeavours.
Exactly. So let's start with limited companies, Ray. Over to you.
And I can't help noticing, Graham, that the example you chose for me to use has one of the most unpronounceable names I've ever seen.
Well, Ray, I know you like a challenge.
Well, OK then, here goes. The company we're going to talk about is called, deep breath, Icelandic Volcano.
Yeah.
And yes, there genuinely is a UK limited company registered under that name as one word.
Yes, and it just almost makes this episode worthwhile just for mentioning it.
Well, that's easy for you to say, less so for me. Now, before we carry on and look at this company in particular, shall we have a general chat about the use and abuse of limited companies?
Yes, let's. And I think it's fair to say that they are not so commonly found directly involved in laundromats, although some of them are, but much more so as the PSCs for limited liability partnerships and Scottish limited partnerships that are directly involved.
Now, PSC. Let me explain what that means. A PSC, or person with significant control, is the equivalent of an owner or controller of a legal entity. In the case of a limited company, it would be at a basic level anyone who owns more than 25% of the shares or otherwise exercises control, say through voting rights, of more than 25% of the company.
Exactly. But confusingly, the PSC can also itself be a legal entity. But in order for it to qualify as a PSC, that legal entity must also be subject to an equivalent transparency regime or listed on one of the very few stock markets. And it's probably worth adding that equivalent transparency regimes are as rare as hen's teeth in the world, and pretty much the UK and New Zealand are the only ones that are properly transparent.
Absolutely. So the basic idea is that where you encounter a company which might otherwise seem like an opaque structure, the general principle is you've got to be able to understand who owns that company. In other words, the individual people who own that company. And
Absolutely.
the exception and the exception to that then is that you can have another company in there as that owner, provided that that company itself is transparent about the actual human beings who own it. And the way that we ensure that is by making sure that's a company that's subject to transparency in its own right.
Spot on. Absolutely right.
Okay. Now, it's worth pointing out straight away that there are a lot of companies on the Companies House website who have declared PSCs that don't meet those requirements, that have PSCs who are companies that aren't in an equivalently listed regime, for instance. And the reason that they get away with that is because there's very little due diligence performed on the filings, which are just accepted by and large without checking.
That's exactly right.
So, to recap, while UK limited companies are sometimes seen in major money laundering schemes, they're more often seen as an intermediate owner of a UK partnership.
Well, yeah, but that's okay, isn't it, given that the UK has a disclosure requirement for limited companies, persons with significant control?
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? Let's talk, shall we, about our Icelandic Volcano company.
Okay, go on then.
It was incorporated on the 10th of January 2018, a little over a year ago, as we recalled. So the first accounts were filed on 27th of February 2019, this year.
And were they interesting?
Well, they were dormant, Graham. They were accounts for a dormant company. The company's registered with a SIC code of 99999, so that's not surprising.
Okay, should I quickly explain what a SIC code is before we go on, Ray?
Yeah, good idea.
So SICs, or Standard Industrial Classification Codes, are used by Companies House and other government bodies to classify the nature of the business activities of the companies that's registered here in the UK.
So they're like NAICS and NACE codes?
Exactly. So NAICS stands for the North American Industry Code System, and NACE, deep breath, stands for Nomenclature des activités économiques dans la Communauté européenne.
So, not just me this week with the dodgy accents then.
No, Ray, sorry about that. Importantly, the industries covered by these different codes do not always correlate. So just because a company has a NAICS code for some industry, it doesn't mean it will exactly match if it's got a SIC or a NACE code.
Okay, so back to the volcano. Turns out it's a dormant volcano.
Oh, you just couldn't resist that, could you?
Too good an opportunity to resist, I'm afraid.
Moving on, what do you read into that?
Oh, given the large number of companies very similar in structure to this one were all created at the same time, I suspect these are off-the-shelf companies designed to be sold on at an opportune moment.
And sorry to interrupt again, Ray, but I think we ought to explain what we mean by an off-the-shelf company.
Yeah, that's fair. An off-the-shelf company is one that's already been incorporated, usually by a company formation agent. Often people like to buy an off-the-shelf company because it saves waiting for the paperwork to come through from setting one up from scratch. But also there can be an advantage in having a company that already has some age, by which I mean it's been in existence some time. Other companies are often very nervous about dealing with brand new companies.
And having a special classification as dormant?
But when you buy an off-the-shelf company, the ownership passes to you by transferring the shares of the company. However, you also inherit the debts of the company as well. So buying a dormant company provides reassurance that there aren't any hidden unpaid bills owed by the company you're buying, which may come back and bite you at a later date.
Got it. So we think these companies are probably being formed to be sold on to other clients.
Exactly. Mind you, the way they're structured makes for quite interesting reading.
Go on.
Well, the incorporation document for the Volcano Company, which is available from Companies House as a PDF, includes both the directors' and shareholders' details.
Right, which is part of the transparency requirements put in place by the UK government, and which eventually will be mandatory in some way or other throughout the EU, following specific EU legislation.
Correct again. The directors of this particular company are what I guess to be the company formation agents, along with a lady named Melissa Keisha da Silva Miller.
Well, that's a fantastic name.
Oh, you don't know the half of it, Graham.
Well,
okay, but before I come to the other exotic names in this case, let's just have a quick chat about the company service provider, who's also acting as company secretary. It's worth pointing out that they are, or have also been, company secretary to another 784 UK entities, 258 of which are still active.
Okay, well, they certainly sound like company formation agents.
Yes, but this particular company is also classified as a non-trading company.
Ah, is that good or bad or what?
Well, it's possible that they simply use the company as a nominee secretary while all the payments go through another company, which is trading. Sadly, I can't find any trace of them on the internet. But their company's house filings reveal they're owned and run by someone whose name crops up repeatedly on laundromat entities.
Okay, so, I mean, I know we're going to be careful around who we associate with laundromats, so shall we just leave that there and go back to the shareholders?
Yes, there's no suggestion of any negative news with them.
Good. So, who are they?
They are the aforementioned Ms. Silvermiller, along with Jumo Ojavi Salmala Grant, and that's just one person, by the way, Misha Nudra Francis Bain, and Kemlin Deborah Gentle.
Well, that's quite a selection. Where do they come from?
2 are from St Vincent and the Grenadines, and 2 from Grenada.
I know I keep saying this, but wow. That's not exactly who or frankly where you'd expect the shareholders of a UK limited company to come from, is it?
No, particularly given that those are territories in which it's actually quite easy to set up a company locally.
So, what do we presume they are simply nominees?
Well, Graham, I'm not sure we can assume that.
Ooh, why do you say that?
Because the company is also obliged to name a person or persons with significant control, the PSCs we were talking about. And that does have to be whoever actually owns or controls the company, not just a nominee. That's the point of the requirement.
Oh, and have they?
No, they haven't, Graham. So what we have to assume from that is that they're relying on the fact that there are 4 shareholders. Now, 4 shareholders means that each of them would own an equal 25% of the entity, exactly 25%, which means that they never trigger the requirement to talk about a PSC, because a PSC is only required to be named when that person's share exceeds 25%. So often when you see 4 equal shareholders in a company, it's a neat way of dodging having to name a PSC. So, thinking about these 4 folk from the Caribbean, we can reasonably assume them to actually own the company. Of course, if it's truly dormant and not trading, it isn't really worth anything, and therefore it's reasonable that 4 folk from Grenada and the Grenadines should own it. And a whole bunch of other companies, most of which are also named after volcanoes.
So life would be rather more interesting if we were to discover a similar company which was actually trading.
Yes, and I believe I found one of those also.
Have you?
Yeah, it's called Portoro Trade Limited.
That's not a volcano though, is it?
No. Portoro is the name of a beautiful black marble with golden veins running through it.
Ooh.
Portoro Trade was formed on the 24th of January 2018, exactly 2 weeks after our volcano company, which I'm not going to name again.
No, don't blame you. Okay then, that's interesting.
Well, yes, it has exactly the same secretary, director and shareholders.
And the SIC code?
59s, Graham. It's a dormant company. In fact, every aspect of its filings at Companies House are identical to the previous company.
Well, I thought you said it was trading.
Well, that might have been stretching what I know a bit further than is strictly provable, but it's definitely in a different category to the previous company, even if its SIC code is the same.
But you just said its entire filing history is the same, so how can it be different?
Because it's the PSC for a UK limited liability partnership.
Is it? So, this strange entity, which has a UK limited company as its secretary and a lady from the Grenadines as its director, and the same lady, along with 3 others from either Grenada or the Grenadines as its shareholders, owns or controls a UK limited liability partnership.
Yes, it does.
That's odd.
It will become even odder when you start to look at the LLP that it owns.
Really?
Yeah, really. But I think we've probably reached a point at which we should break and let our listeners get on with their day. Maybe you'd like to have a look into this LLP and explain it to our listeners in the next episode.
I will definitely do that, Ray.
In the meantime, though, just one thing that I think we could usefully leave them with. Graham, whenever talk turns to Companies House, which it does surprisingly often, I always think about the frankly embarrassing steps that the UK government took seeking to prevent its ridicule at the laxness of Companies House.
Yes, are we talking about poor old Kevin Brewer?
That's who I was thinking of, yeah.
Yeah, it's sad, isn't it? That I mean, the UK have legislation that says that if you file knowingly fake details on Companies House, that you can be fined. And I think we've probably seen a good few, which we would think are probably fake, and nothing's ever happened. So, do you want to tell people what happened to poor old Kevin?
Yeah, no, I'm glad to. Well, Kevin was also a little bit frustrated with the obviously false disclosures that have been made to Companies House. So he set out to demonstrate how easy it was to post patently false information on Companies House.
Probably worth saying that Kevin Brewer is himself a company formation agent who believes passionately in doing the job properly with the correct due diligence. So he had a real interest in pointing out that others were not doing quite such a good job.
Oh yeah, he's definitely one of the good guys.
He created a company, certainly one with Vince Cable as the director, didn't he?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and what happened to him?
Well, you would have thought that would have been quite easily stopped at the gates of Companies House as being ridiculous. It wasn't. It went through. It ended up on the database. So Kevin, increasingly frustrated not only that he'd been able to get that through the gates, but that nobody seemed to have spotted it or wanted to do anything about it, blew the whistle on himself effectively, and reached out to the authorities and said, look what I've been able to do.
And they showed their appreciation
by prosecuting him under the law that we were just talking about. Kevin received a fine for his troubles, and obviously all of the public censure that accompanies that.
And as far as we're aware, I'm pretty sure I'm saying he's the only person ever to have been prosecuted under that particular act.
Extraordinarily, that is correct.
Hmm.
and actually, when we gather back again next week for the second episode, I think we'll be able to share with our listeners some insight into exactly what was frustrating Kevin.
And I will be diligently researching that episode as I go through the next week.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Dark Money Files. We hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to listen to future episodes, please subscribe through iTunes, Spotify, or your normal podcast provider. Thanks.